Welcome to Jaguar Bootcamp, setting up your hardware. The information in this presentation is the property of Innovative Timing Systems. All of this information is confidential and may not be disclosed to anyone outside of Innovative Timing Systems or your own company without written authorization from the President of Innovative Timing Systems. This presentation is only provided to customers who are under a current support agreement that has not expired. You've purchased a Jaguar system and you're preparing to use it for races. One of the first things you want to think about is how you're going to supply power to the Jaguar hardware. Now, Jaguar requires that you provide pure sine wave power. In your home or perhaps at your office, the wall outlet will provide pure sine wave power in most locations around the world. However, if you happen to be operating the Jaguar equipment at a race where you don't have a wall outlet that you can plug into, you're going to need to supply your own power. And to do that, you're going to want to select a generator that puts out pure sine wave. How are you going to know if the generator does that? Well, generators will have technical specifications that you could read, certainly on the internet or on the box at that vendor where you're purchasing it, and it will say that it has inverter power, and also it will say sine wave. So you want to look for that. Some generators will use simulated sine wave, or they'll say nearly sine wave or square wave. None of those will work. You have to have pure sine wave power. Now on screen we have two examples of generators that do just that. There are many other models out there, but these two happen to be what we use at our own company and have had very good luck with them. On the left we see the Champion power generator. This product is sold on the internet as well as at Sam's Club. And the price point is fabulous. At about $499, it puts out 2,000 watts of pure sine wave power. It's a very quiet generator, and it doesn't require much fuel. The Honda generator comes in a series called the EU series. The EU 1000i puts out 1,000 watts. The 2000i's, which you see here on the screen, is 2,000 watts. And then there's the 3000i, which obviously puts out 3,000 watts. Now, Jaguar doesn't require more than a few hundred watts of power, typically about 200 watts. So both of these generators are more than large enough to supply power to perhaps 3 or 4 Jaguar systems. Now, you've received your trussing that comes with the Jaguar system. On screen, we have a picture of a typical cubby or bronze truss. It's possible you may have this type of truss as well for a silver system. In some cases, your silver will have a slightly heavier duty trussing, and if you have a gold system, very likely it has a much larger and much heavier truss to handle all of the antennas. When you're setting up the truss, the process is quite easy, and it's well documented in our manual. But there's a few things you have to make sure of. First of all, when you connect the two 5-foot sections that make the top piece of the trussing, you want to make sure that the center bar is located where you see me moving the cursor. There's a center bar there that's vertical that's used to provide additional support to the truss in the center. On the left and right side here, you'll see the tripod stands, and on top we have the bars that are placed up there that allow us to hang banners or other items. One of the first rules of using a truss, particularly when there are banners on it as well, is you have to secure it. Never ever set up a truss like this, put your antennas on it, and use it at a race without safety ropes that are tied off to the tower, and then use sandbags as well at the base of the tripod to make sure the feet stay in place. The tripod stands are unlikely to blow over if there's no wind, but should you have, say, 10-20 mile per hour winds or more, it's a possibility that the tripod could actually be blown over. So it's best to always make sure that you have ropes tied off. Now, we'll tie off the ropes typically to the first joint here that you see. There's a thumb wheel that's used to tighten that down. And we might have a second rope that's coming up a little bit higher. And that's to make sure that this can't possibly blow over. Remember, when you have banners connected to this trussing, it's a big sail, and it will in fact catch the wind. So you have to make sure to secure it with ropes and sandbags. One other tip that will help you a lot is this tripod comes in 3 sections. It's best to never raise this top section more than 2 feet. As a rule here, we don't tend to raise it more than 1 foot, but definitely you never want to raise it more than 2 feet, and the reason is simple. This top piece is about 5 feet long. When it's only raised 2 feet, then it tends to be inside of the middle section as well as the lower section. So it provides much sturdier capabilities, and it prevents it from breaking in high winds. Okay, so we've put up our trussing. It's quite simple to do. Typically this won't take more than about 10 minutes, and we've secured it. One other thing that's very important is to make sure that you place cones around the legs of the trussing. We recommend that you purchase 3-foot tall orange cones. Those are available at local stores like Home Depot or Lowe's, Walmart, Builder Square, Ace Hardware, or you can buy them online, and there are a number of great suppliers for those. Never set up this tower without having a cone placed at the legs at every single point. And the reason for that is simple. When runners are approaching the finish line, they may not notice that leg, and you don't want to trip them. Also, if there are fans standing around or just walking around near the antenna structure, we don't want them to damage the antenna trussing. So always use cones. Okay, now that you've got your trussing set up, let's talk about the other components that come with your Jaguar system. In this particular case, we're showing a bronze system. If you received a cubby, you'll have a single white plastic case that contains the hardware and the antenna, and it would be mounted dead center on the trussing that you see in this picture. In this case, we're using a bronze, and so what we've done is we've placed our antennas up on the trussing. The mounts for that are very secure. You need to make sure to tighten them down so there's no chance they can come loose. The antennas are placed on the trussing at a particular height, and let's talk about that. This particular antenna on the side, and this one as well, is typically mounted at about 3.5 feet off the ground. The top antennas, as you can see here, are spaced evenly across the top of the truss. You'll find that this layout works very well for your races, and you'll get good quality chip reads. The reason for the side antennas is quite simple. Despite the fact that runners should wear the chip on a bib on the front of their body, perhaps high up on their chest, sometimes runners don't pay attention and they'll put it on the side of their running shorts. So the side antennas are there to make sure that you're able to read those chips as well. Now, in terms of cabling this to our reader, it's really quite simple. There are black heavy-duty antenna cables that came with your system that measure from 20 to 35 feet in length. You're simply going to plug a cable into the back of the antenna, make sure that it's secured very well, and then you're going to bring the cable up on the arch, over the top and back down, and you're going to plug it into one of the 4 ports on the reader. You're going to do the same thing with the second, third, and fourth antenna. So when you're done, you'll have 4 antenna cables plugged into the reader. Now, one very important note, that should always happen prior to powering on the timing cabinet. Okay? This is the cabinet that you see right here where my cursor is moving. It's very important to make sure that all 4 antennas are always plugged in first. If you don't do that, there's a possibility that if the reader is enabled, and you'll learn more about that in a future lesson, you could actually burn out a reader by not having all the antennas connected. So very good to do that. If you're using a cubby, you'll have a single box up on top, and there's a single cable that comes out of that box. It happens to be an Ethernet cable, and that cable will come down across the top, and it will be plugged directly into the laptop. So for cubby, all you simply do is mount the box in the center, you'll bring it down, the cable down that is, and you'll plug it into the laptop. Very straightforward. In the case of a bronze, silver, or gold, you're running an antenna cable across the top of the arch and down, and you're plugging it into this reader, and we'll talk more about that in just a moment. Now, the last thing you have to do before you power up is you want to plug a cable that comes out of the back of this timing cabinet into your laptop computer. Most of the time, if you're using a bronze, silver, or gold system, you'll be plugging that in using an Ethernet interface. In other words, there'll be a cable that comes out of the back of the system, and that's used to plug into the Ethernet port on your laptop. There are also serial cables which are converted to USB, and if the Ethernet interface should stop working for any reason, you could simply plug that into the laptop and you'd continue to be able to operate the system. Finally, the last thing we need to talk about on this slide is the orientation and aiming of antennas. It's very important that you do that correctly so that you can maximize your read rates. Now let's start off with a cubby. If you have your cubby mounted overhead, dead center, as you should, you're going to angle the cubby at about 45 degrees to the road surface. So about 45-degree angle downward towards the road. And in fact, if you were to stand roughly about 7 to 8 feet in front of the finish line, if this happened to be our finish line, the cubby would be aimed right about at our waist. Right about at our waist. So that's what you want to do with the cubby. With the bronze, silver, or gold systems, the top antennas will be angled down as well at 45 degrees. They'll be going straight forward towards the pavement, but again, they'll be tilted downward at 45. The side antennas will be tilted at 45 degrees towards the center as well. And an easy way to make sure that works well is to have somebody stand about 10 feet in front of the finish line, dead center, and simply aim these two antennas at their chest, and take the two top antennas and aim them down, straight down towards their feet. One final thing, and that is the height of the trussing itself. We recommend that the bottom of the antennas always be from 7 to 7.5 feet off the ground. If you raise the truss to the point where these antennas are perhaps 8 or 9 feet off the ground, you'll lower the read rate just slightly for the system. There's a rule that you'll want to follow, which is the closer the antenna comes to the timing chip, the better it performs. So we always want to make sure the bottom of these top antennas is about 7 to 7.5 feet. Again, the height for the side antennas, about 3.5 feet. You follow those rules, you'll get very, very good read rates. Now, let's take a look at some configurations for antennas. This information is actually available on It's Social. And you're already on It's Social because you're watching this video. So if you go to the section called Resources on It's Social, you'll find that there are a number of options available with helpful documentation, and this happens to be one of them. In this case, we're looking at the Bronze 7000 Antenna Configuration Guide. And what it does, it gives us some helpful information about how our antennas should be laid out and how they should be numbered. Now let me explain very briefly what that means. When our timing cabinet is sitting over here, and if we're using 4 antennas overhead, we're going to actually take the cable that comes from this antenna and we're going to plug it into the port that's labeled 1 on the reader. Same thing here. We'll take the antenna from this, the cable from this antenna and run it down, and we'll plug it into port number 3. You can see here 0 and 2. This is an overhead configuration which might be used for a mountain bike event or perhaps road cycling where we have H chips on the helmet. On this particular configuration to the right, you can see this looks more like what I had just a moment ago that I was showing you. In this case, we have the timing cabinet again on the right side. The overhead antenna is going to be 0 and 3, and we have 1 and 2. So just remember that when you pull the cable from this antenna and you bring it down and plug it in the timing cabinet, plug it into the port that's numbered as you see on the diagram. Again, visit It's Social and look under our resources and you'll see these guides not only for the 7000 or Bronze, you'll see it as well for all of our other systems, and that'll help you remember on race day how you need to set up your system. Finally, the last thing we want to take a look at is the reader itself. In this photo, you can see a Jaguar reader that's on a Bronze system. And what we've done is we've shown you the lights and the antenna ports themselves. And we'll talk about the configuration of the reader very briefly. First of all, in the back, there's a power connector. Here's the serial connector that provides us a USB connection should we need it. There's a LAN connection, and that's the cable that might get plugged into our laptop so that we can talk to the reader. There's an I/O port interface that you won't use at this time, but it's there for enhancements and future products that can be added to your Jaguar system. If you notice to the right, the antennas are labeled. So we have antenna 0, antenna 1, 2, and 3, and that corresponds with those antenna numbers I just showed you on that cheat sheet out on It's Social. Now you'll notice once we've plugged in our antennas, we want to power on the system. Just below the reader on your timing system, there is a power supply. In fact, it's a backup power supply that can provide up to about 60 minutes of backup power should your generator go down on you. On that power supply, there's a little latch that you open up and press a button to turn on power to the system. When you do that, you'll see on top of the reader that the power light will light up green. Now that reader that's in your timing cabinet can actually be pulled out. The shelf that it's mounted on has ball bearings, and it's designed to be pulled out so that you can actually see the top of the reader. So when you pull that shelf out, you'll see the power light come on, and then what you'll see is you'll see the link light light up if you're using Ethernet to connect to your laptop. If you're using USB, that light will not come on. Now once the light comes on for power, the reader goes through a self-diagnostic test mode, which typically takes about 2 to 5 minutes. Depends on RF noise in the area. It could depend on other conditions, but generally speaking, about 2 to 5 minutes is needed so that it can do its self-diagnostic test. As it's doing that, you'll notice that antenna 0 will light up, and it'll flash quite a bit for about 5 to 10 seconds. And then antenna 1 will light up, and you'll see the little green LED come on, again for about 5 or 10 seconds. It'll repeat that process all the way through antenna 3. So what it's doing is it's actually testing those antenna ports to make sure an antenna is plugged in and it's operating correctly. Should it find that there's a problem, what will happen is the test will repeat, and the software built into our readers will automatically try to diagnose any problems and actually correct them. If it's unable to correct a problem, we will light up a fault light. You'll see a little red light come on down here that says there's a fault, and you'll know that you've got a problem. Typically when that happens, the best thing to do is to make sure all 4 antennas are securely plugged in, turn the system off, wait about 30 seconds, and power it back on. You'll find that the system can actually self-heal itself, diagnose problems, and fix them on the fly, and there's a good chance when you power back up the system, it will operate normally. Now, once this antenna testing has completed, there's a few other diagnostics that are done, and when that's finally finished, up to about 5 minutes, the CPU light, as you see here, will begin to blink rapidly. When you see the CPU light blinking rapidly, wait about 30 more seconds, and you're ready to then use the timing system. That means you'll go to the laptop where you have our software loaded, you'll connect to the reader, and you'll begin to use it to time an event. So this is the recap of the reader. Let's make sure we follow this once more. You want to make sure that all 4 antennas are plugged in before you power on the timing system. The switch for powering up the system is on the power supply. There's a little plastic door that you open up, and you press that, and that'll power on the system. You want to make sure then that the power light comes on. Again, if you're connected to Ethernet, you'll see the link light. And finally, once it goes through the self-diagnostic test, the CPU light will come on, and you'll know that the system is ready to go. If that CPU light stops blinking, or if you see a red fault light, then you're going to want to power off the system, power it back on, and try again. If that doesn't fix the problem, then you'll want to call our technical support team. That concludes this particular module. We'll see you for the next one real soon.